The increase in our abilities to fight fires both in nature and in our cities has drastically improved over the centuries and accelerated since the invention of the internal combustion engine, and from humble beginnings to today's highly specialized options of fire trucks. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I am John, and this is a far too brief history of the fire truck. But first, let's look back in history at how we fought fires. Fire has been an ever-present danger as soon as humans grouped together in villages where open flames or lighting combined with flammable building materials close to each other could lead to catastrophic blazes. Multiple fires have gone down in history books, such as Nero fiddling while Rome burned, the Great London Fire, and the Great Chicago Fire. But in most of human history, the ability to fight fire has been very limited. Most firefighting in the past was done by depriving the fire of fuel, such as tearing pieces off the building or demolishing nearby buildings to prevent its spread, as well as throwing buckets of water or wet blankets on the fire. For example, back in Roman times, firefighting was done originally by private firefighters. Marcus Crassus was known as the richest man in Rome, if you've ever heard the phrase as rich as Crassus, and infamously he ran his own firefighting brigade of 500 men. When a building caught fire, and it's alleged he would sometimes have the fire started, legend has it he would have his firemen stand around while he agreed with the building owner to buy it at literally a fire sale price, and once agreed to, his firefighters would put the fire out and he would have a new valuable piece of property in need of repair or rebuild. If the owner didn't agree, they let it burn. The first organized fire corps was in Rome when a group of 7,000 slaves armed with buckets and axes acted as firemen and police. Nero even put in place some of the first city planning that mandated street widths, building separation, specifying max distance before a stone temple or a park was required, and maximum building heights, all intended to help slow the spread of fire. In the 3rd century BC, the Greeks had a double force pump that could eject a steady stream of water towards a fire. In fact, there's records as early as 400 BC that large bags made of ox gut would be filled with water and then stomped on to blast the water out onto a fire. But it took all the way till the 16th century before wheel-mounted syringes came into use, having a capacity of about a barrel of water. At this time, the traditional bucket brigade was still the most commonly used, as well as being required to refill the syringe, but there were also hand squirts, which only held up to about 4 quarts of water and required 3 men to operate. After the Great Fire of London in 1666 burned for 4 days, one Nicholas Barbon introduced the first fire insurance, founded his own fire brigade, and insured buildings that were marked as being eligible for the company's firefighting services. Others sprung up, and it wasn't until 1833 that these various groups were merged into the London Fire Company. Similarly, in 1736, Ben Franklin started the first volunteer fire department in Philadelphia called the Union Fire Company, and it lasted until 1820. Laws at the time required each house or business to have a bucket of water on the front stoop for the initial work of the bucket brigade. In New York, the number of buckets required to have on hand varied based on the business. For example, 3 for a baker or 6 for a brewer. Major equipment used by firefighters at the time also included sacks to remove valuables from buildings, as well as bed keys to quickly take apart bed frames, which were often the most valuable furniture in a house. In fact, fire hoses weren't introduced until 1794 in Philadelphia. The earliest engines were carried or dragged to the fire by men, and in 1690 Dutch inventor John Lofting further developed the pump with his patented sucking worm engine. Richard Newsom expanded on the idea with a pump engine that used 2 single-acting pistons to help even out the water flow. These early fire engines not only had pumps powered by multiple men, but the best of them had cisterns which needed constant filling by a bucket brigade. In 1822, a Philly-based company developed the Hydraulion, which is considered the first suction engine, allowing the pump to draft water from a water source, eliminating the need for many men for the bucket brigade. In the U.S., there was no government-run fire departments until nearly the time of the Civil War, and private fire brigades competed to be the first to respond as insurance companies paid the brigades to save buildings. The first career fire department in the U.S. was in 1853 in Cincinnati, Ohio. The first horse-drawn steam engine pumper was invented in England in 1829, but was not really accepted until the 1860s. Misc Locomotive Works in New Hampshire built locomotives, but also built horse-drawn steam-powered engines until 1876, including for the New York City Fire Department and the first Los Angeles Fire Department. Interestingly, the Great Fire of Boston in 1872 was made worse because many of the horses used to pull the heavy equipment had the flu. While there were horse-drawn options, many smaller pumpers were also intended to be moved in position by teams of men, including those which required teams to manually pump the water. The idea of a motorized fire engine actually dates back to 1897 when the police in Paris applied for funds for a petroleum-powered engine to convey ladders, equipment, and staff. In 1905, popular mechanics proposed the use of a motorized fire engine. The first modern fire engine was made by Knox Automobile Company in 1906 and included ladders, lanterns, and sirens. The firefighters would stand on running boards hanging on as it made its way to the fire. Also in 1906, the Motorized Company produced a fire engine with two gas-powered engines, one for propulsion and one for pumping. Notably, the company American LaFrance can trace its roots back to 1832, making fire apparatus. By 1873, they sold hand-powered equipment, and by 1903, steam-powered, and its first motorized fire engine in 1907. It was 1910 when the motivation and pumping functions were combined into one engine. It was the late 1800s when improvements in reaching tall structures was innovated. Extendable ladders increased in length until they required the development of turntable ladders and mounted directly on the truck. After World War II, the turntable was supplemented with the aerial work platform or cherry picker that allowed greater access around the building. While many fire truck manufacturers created their own chassis, others at various times used Freightliner, GMC, or other chassis, and in early days, small fire engines could be based on existing chassis like the Model T or the Crane Simplex. In 1947, American LaFrance introduced their 700 series with a cab-forward design and established the standard for the industry. In the 1970s, the industry began to move towards diesel engines, which provided more power and pumping ability. Notably, in 2005, American LaFrance was the fifth largest manufacturer of emergency vehicles in North America, and by 2014, they had closed shop. The fire truck has evolved from crude handheld equipment to sledges drugged to the fire and hand-pumped to motorized and to the powerful and specialized vehicles of today. But the story of firefighting has so many interesting components. For example, it wasn't until 1673 that a painter also happened to be the superintendent of the fire brigade in Amsterdam, produced the first fire hose by sewing leather tubes together in 50-foot lengths, what is still considered the standard length today. It wasn't until 1821 a rubber-lined woven hose was introduced, and modern hoses are polyester or nylon woven yarn. Oh, and have you ever heard a fire hydrant called a fire plug? Well, the reason is that the early water lines in cities were made of wood, so that when firemen needed water, they cut a hole in the line, and when they were done, they hammered a wooden plug into it. Since the early beginnings, types of fire trucks have become specialized with ladders, ladder trucks, cherry pickers, remote, chemical, and tankers. Of course, they're now equipped with light bars, sirens, specific paint to identify them, reflective markings, and carrying all the equipment needed. Today, Ford, Freightliner, and International all supply chassis for modern fire trucks in the USA, while companies like Pierce also manufacture their own chassis, including the move to EV trucks. Thanks for being here. Please show this channel some love with your like and your comment, and a special thanks to all my Patreons. If you support histories as well as news opinions, please consider supporting this channel, and be sure to check out this next video. I'm sure you will love watching a history of Checker Cab. Thanks for being here.